My name is Beatrice Blake. I am 70 years old, a retired co-owner of Blake's Pharmacy, and a woman who thought she had already lived through every kind of heartbreak life could throw at her. I was wrong. What happened in my son's living room that afternoon proved that even at my age, the world can still split open beneath your feet. And if you're someone who has ever been blindsided by your own family, you may want to stay with me. This story doesn't begin softly. It begins with a laugh that changed everything. And before we go any further, if you find strength in stories like mine, you can tap the follow button so you don't miss the next chapter. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. I heard my son laugh, and that laugh moved my future. I hadn't planned to stop by his house that day. I had left my reading glasses at his place the night before, and Ruth, my best friend of 40 years, kept telling me not to drive without them. So I turned the car around, walked up the familiar front steps, and let myself in with the spare key he insisted I keep. I thought I would grab the glasses and head home. I thought it would be a quiet afternoon. Instead, I stepped into the kind of moment every parent hopes never to witness. His voice carried from the back room, sharp, clear, and far too delighted. "I moved everything to Serena," he said. "Can't wait to see Mom broke." I stopped breathing. The door was still half open behind me, cold air curling around my ankles. My son laughed again, louder this time, as if he were celebrating a punchline. 320,000, he said. Gone. She won't even know until it's too late. I felt something inside me loosen, like my ribs suddenly forgot how to hold me up. My legs weakened. For a moment, I could only stare at the hallway, listening to the sound of him tapping his phone, the casual rhythm of betrayal. It happened so quickly, so brutally casually, that my mind resisted it. My own child, my Marcus, laughing while moving my money out. I pressed my palm to the wall to steady myself. My breath trembled. My throat closed. Every instinct in me said to step forward, to confront him, to shout, to ask why. But I didn't. Something deeper than fear told me to stay quiet, to listen, to survive this moment without being seen. Serena's voice joined his, soft, smooth, calculated. "Just finish the transfer. Don't worry about her. She trusts you." Another laugh. "Yeah, she'll never see it coming." My fingers curled against the wall. Heat built in my eyes, but the tears refused to fall, trapped behind shock sharp as glass. I didn't know which of his words hurt more, the ones about the money or the ease with which he stripped me of dignity. "Can't wait to see Mom broke." That sentence would echo in me for months. My husband Henry used to say betrayal from strangers wounds your pride, but betrayal from family wounds your bones. Standing in that hallway, I finally understood what he meant. My bones felt cold, hollow, and years older than they were. I backed away from the voices, step by careful step, moving as quietly as someone escaping a crime scene. When I reached the door, I slipped out without a sound. The sunlight outside was bright and warm, but I couldn't feel any of it. Everything in me was shaking. I reached my car, opened the door, and collapsed into the driver's seat. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and tried to breathe, but each breath caught in the same place, a knot made of grief and disbelief. I kept seeing Marcus as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees, holding up frog jars, asking me to check his homework. And then I saw him again, grown, smiling cruelly over a screen, sending away my life savings as if it were a game. I drove without knowing where I was going. I passed the pharmacy Henry and I had built together. I passed the church where he's buried. I passed the diner where Marcus used to love pancakes with whipped cream. Each place felt like another piece of my life knocked out of alignment. I pulled over at a quiet park and finally let the tears fall. Not loud tears, not dramatic sobs, just slow, heavy ones that slid down my cheeks like something that had waited too long to be released. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and stared at my hands. They were old hands, hands with veins visible beneath thin skin, hands that had spent decades counting bills, measuring medicine, cleaning up after others, holding a family together. And now my own son had decided to dismantle me. For a few minutes, all I could feel was the weight of betrayal. Then another feeling slid in beside it. Not anger, not rage. Something quieter, something steadier. A single sentence surfaced in my mind, as clear as if someone whispered it in my ear. Don't break. Think. And then another thought followed, sharp and certain. Do not let him see you hurt. Do not let him know what you heard. Move before he moves again. Be ahead, not behind. I sat up straighter. I took one deep breath, then another. My heart was still aching, but underneath the ache, something fierce was waking up. Something that had been sleeping ever since Henry died. Something that remembered how to protect what I had left. I pulled my phone from my purse and looked at the lock screen. It was a picture of Henry smiling with a fishing hat on. That crooked grin that always made me feel safe. I whispered to him without thinking. He thinks he took everything. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. A strange calm settled over me. I wasn't going to collapse. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to confront Marcus without a plan. If he wanted to believe I was weak, I would let him. If he wanted to laugh at my supposed ignorance, I would give him more things to laugh at. I would smile at him. I would play along. I would stay quiet. And while he was laughing, I would be moving every piece he didn't see. I started the car. The sun was beginning to set. But I felt something rise inside me for the first time that day. A direction, a purpose, a quiet, burning resolve. When Marcus came home later, he would see me smile, and I would tell him the truth he never expected. I had moved everything yesterday, and I wasn't done. I woke up the next morning feeling like someone had taken the floor out from under my life and put it back crooked. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's laugh again, that bright, careless sound cutting through me like ice water. But when the sun came through the blinds, soft and warm, I forced myself to sit up, put both feet on the floor, and remember who I was long before that moment in his living room. I was a wife for 43 years. I was a mother for 40. I was the co-owner of a pharmacy that served 3 generations of families. And I was not going to let one awful afternoon erase all of that. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the kind Henry used to insist would calm the soul, not just the stomach. The kettle hissed. The cup warmed my hands, and for a moment I felt steady. But then my eyes drifted to the small wooden box on the counter. Inside it were a few things of Henry's I could never put away. His wedding ring, a pocket knife he had since high school, and the one thing that had been with me through every storm, the voicemail he left me 2 days before he passed. I opened the box carefully. The reading glasses I'd retrieved from Marcus's house sat inside, still in their cracked brown case. I picked them up, feeling the familiar weight. They were nothing special, cheap frames from a drugstore sale. But they made me think of all the days Henry teased me for refusing to buy a nicer pair. "You read the labels for half the neighborhood," he'd say. "At least treat your eyes with respect." My hands were trembling as I lifted my phone. I didn't plan to listen to the voicemail. I just wanted to hold the device, feel something from him, remember something other than yesterday's betrayal. But my thumb slipped. The message played. "B," Henry's voice said, warm and steady. "If someone ever tries to take from you, remember who you are. You've worked too hard, loved too deeply, to let anyone reduce you. Keep your dignity. Keep your ground. Promise me that." I closed my eyes. His voice wrapped around me like an old blanket, soft and threaded with memory. For a moment, I could almost feel him standing behind me in the kitchen, one hand on my shoulder, reminding me that storms don't always break us. Sometimes they show us what we're made of. I sat down at the table and let myself breathe. Slow, even. My chest ached, but the ache wasn't just pain anymore. It was purpose forming its shape. If Henry were here, he wouldn't tell me to cry. He wouldn't tell me to collapse. He would tell me to stand up straighter, to think, to move deliberately, to protect myself with the same steadiness I'd used to protect our family for so many years. The tea cooled beside me. A beam of sunlight traced across the table, catching the edge of the wooden box and making it glow faintly. I reached inside again and took out his watch. The leather band was worn smooth. The tiny scratch across the glass came from the day Marcus, at 9 years old, tried to fix a bike chain and accidentally sent the wrench flying. Henry had laughed about that scratch for years. He said imperfections made a thing real. I pressed the watch to my chest. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "But I know I can't let him destroy himself or me." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Ruth. I answered with a shaky hello. "You didn't sleep," she said immediately. She could always hear exhaustion in my voice. "Talk to me." I told her everything. I told her about the laugh, the number, the transfer, the cruelty in Marcus's tone. I told her how I backed out of the house like a frightened stranger, how I drove for an hour without knowing where I was going, how something inside me was rising, but I didn't know if it was strength or sorrow. Ruth was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady. "B, you listen to me carefully. This is not the moment to break. This is the moment to protect yourself. You need to act like nothing happened. You need to gather information. You need to move like a woman who has everything to lose and refuses to lose it quietly." Her words steadied me. Ruth had always been my moral anchor, the one who reminded me that pain isn't the ending unless we let it be. "Start with yourself," she said. "And start with Henry. What would he tell you to do today?" I looked at the watch again. I didn't need to imagine his answer. I already heard it. "Think first," I whispered. "Move carefully." Ruth exhaled into the phone, relieved. "Good. You still have your instincts. Use them. This isn't some fight in the dark. This is math. This is paperwork. This is strategy. And you've been smarter than both of them for decades." I smiled weakly. Ruth always believed in me at the moments when believing in myself felt impossible. "I just feel stupid," I said. "How did I not see it?" "You're a mother," she replied. "Mothers don't go looking for knives in their children's hands." Her words struck deep, not painfully, truthfully. "B," she continued, "you have to get ahead of him, and you can, but you need to be calm, very calm. Think of your next steps, and don't let him know you know." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I slipped Henry's watch back into the box, then closed the lid slowly. The sound of it clicking shut felt like a decision. "Go to the bank," Ruth said. "Ask for your full transaction history. See what he's done. See what's left. Then call me." I agreed. My breath steadied. My heart slowed. The fear was still there, but it had a shape now, something I could walk around and measure instead of drowning in. Before hanging up, Ruth said one last thing. You were always the strong one in your family, Bea. Henry knew it. I know it. And deep down, Marcus knows it too. He's counting on you to crumble. Don't give him that. I ended the call, sat for a moment in silence, then stood with a clarity I hadn't felt since Henry passed. I gathered my purse, my glasses, and my keys. I looked around my kitchen, the place where I had built so many ordinary days, and realized today would not be ordinary at all. It would be the day I began to reclaim my life. I stepped outside. The morning air smelled like sea breeze and jasmine. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered to Henry's memory, I'm keeping my dignity, just like you asked. I walked into Serena's kitchen the way you step into a room you once knew well, but which has been rearranged while you slept. The paint was the same soft cream and the little plant by the sink still leaned toward the window, but everything else felt staged, as if someone had practiced living there on a set. Serena stood by the counter, lipstick perfect, hair in that precise smooth curve she favored. She smiled when she saw me, and the smile was all teeth and calculation. Bea, what a surprise, she said, her voice syrup-thin. Marcus hovered nearby, phone in hand, pretending to scroll but alert to every small shift in the air. I kept my voice steady. Thank you, I said, setting the casserole dish down. My hands had been steady all morning. They were steady now. I refused to let him or her see the tremor beneath. I had promised Ruth I would act like nothing had happened. I would be pleasant. I would be ordinary. That was the plan. We sat at the small table by the window. Serena opened with easy questions that sounded casual but probed like a sonar. Which bank do you use now, Bea? Still keep accounts at the old place? Her words were small stones dropped into still water, searching for a ripple. I answered in plain sentences, keeping my eyes on the steam rising from the casserole. I would not be bait. When Marcus left the room to take a call, Serena's posture changed. Her fingers moved with practiced gentleness as she smoothed a napkin. So how are you managing, really? She asked softly. It must be so hard to handle everything on your own. If you ever need help, financial stuff, I mean, I know a few people who do estate planning. They're very helpful for older folks. There it was. The offer of help was a map. The phrase, if you ever need help, was not a kindness. It was reconnaissance. The reflex to defend rose in me, deflect, explain, justify. But Ruth's voice sat like a small stone in my head. Act calm, gather facts, don't let him see, you know. I'm fine, thank you, I said. Henry handled most of the books. I have things in order. She tilted her head as if grading my answer. Oh, Henry was such a good man. I heard he built the pharmacy from scratch. That must be so hard on you. Her pity was practiced, an ingredient in her toolkit. Some people don't understand how to manage money when their partner is gone, she added offhand. It never hurts to be careful these days. So many scams. The way she watched me felt like a hand rearranging my life. I watched her watch me. The small, precise gestures, the tilt of her cup, the way she always used the same phrase when she wanted someone to feel small. I excused myself to get a glass of water and used the walk to steady my breath. I ran my fingertips along the hallway wall as if checking whether it was solid. My throat closed and opened with the same small sound. Back at the table, Marcus laughed under his breath at something on the phone. Serena leaned in and lowered her voice. He's been so helpful, she said of Marcus. Helps keep things efficient, with transfers. Keeps everything moving. I kept my tone light. He's always been helpful, I said, which did not cover the truth. I left with a polite smile and a thank you, walking out into sunlight that felt too bright, like a stage light. I had not finished. I stopped at the pharmacy because I needed to feel myself moving in a place Henry and I had made. The counter was familiar, the cashier's name tag a little faded. I lingered near the ledger shelves, pretending to look for a bottle of cough syrup, and instead watched how I moved. What betrayed alarm, what calmed it. That afternoon, I drove to the bank, not to make a scene, not to withdraw funds, but to collect facts the way someone collects shells at the water's edge, carefully, quietly, without making a sound. Harold at the bank greeted me with his practiced smile. He has a calm that comes from years of keeping other people's records straight, the kind of steadiness that feels like a small lamp in fog. "Ms. Blake," he said, offering his hand. "How can I help?" "I need a complete transaction history," I said. "An itemized statement for the last 6 months for all my accounts." He paused, polite but unruffled. "That's a large request. Do you want that mailed or would you prefer to view it here?" "Here, please," I replied. He led me to a small room behind the teller line where a quiet radio hummed and the screen filled with numbers that, at first glance, meant nothing, and at second glance, meant everything. There were transfers, some small, some larger, a few that had been rejected and retried. My pulse matched the flicker of the cursor. "There have been a few attempts to transfer funds out of your account," Harold said in a measured tone. "One was blocked because of a flag on the wire, but several got through. The transfers list the recipient as Serena Vale or accounts tied to her name." The air left my lungs. I kept my face neutral. "How much?" I asked softly, careful that my voice not betray the way my hands shook. 320,000 over the last month, he said, as if reading a weather report. The number landed and I felt thin, as if someone had taken out the stuffing from a coat. But relief came in the shape of a small fact. There were rejected transfers. Someone had tried and failed. There was a trail, and that meant there was a pattern. I thanked Harold and left with a paper copy of the transaction history folded like a map. On the walk home, I read the list again, tracing amounts and dates with a fingertip. Ruth's counsel was in my ear. Strategy, not spectacle. I put the paper into my purse and felt the weight of it like a small anchor. On the porch, I paused and thought about subtler moves. If they were practiced at kindness, then I would be practiced at watching. I would collect details the way a seamstress collects threads. A name, a location, a time. I would make a list and tuck it into my pocket, invisible until needed. I would not accuse. I would not cry. I would ask simple questions that sounded like ordinary curiosity, and that could be recorded when needed. I would keep receipts. I would note ATM locations. I would preserve the ordinary paper trail they thought insignificant. As I looked up at the sky, clarity settled on my shoulders. Not fury, strategy. I would find out how they moved. I would find out what they thought they could take. And I would make sure they learned what happens when you try to take from the wrong woman. Ruth arrived at my house just after sunrise, carrying a bag of fresh muffins and the kind of expression she only wears when she knows I am on a narrow edge. She placed the bag on the counter and sat across from me without taking off her coat. "All right," she said, folding her hands. "Show me everything." I handed her the printed transaction history Harold had given me. She studied each line with the quiet intensity of someone who has spent a lifetime deciphering the hidden notes beneath ordinary sentences. When she reached the largest number, her mouth tightened. They weren't experimenting, she said softly. This was deliberate. I nodded. I had rehearsed calm all morning. My chest still tightened whenever the thought of Marcus crossed my mind, but I held steady. You told me to gather facts, I said. So I did. Now what? Ruth leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. Now you act like none of this is happening, she said. Not an inch of anger, not a flicker of fear. If Marcus or Serena thinks you know, they'll move faster. You need time. Her guidance settled into me like a lamp turned on in a dim room. I had always trusted Ruth's instincts. They had carried me through storms before. She reached for a muffin and broke it in half. You're going to keep your routine, she said. You're going to smile. You're going to visit when they invite you. You're going to nod when they mention money. And while they think you're harmless, you're going to gather more. I lifted my cup of tea and stared at the rising steam. What exactly am I gathering? I asked. Ruth pointed at the transaction sheet. Patterns, accounts, times, dates, anything that shows movement. These people slip when they think you trust them. People. It hurt hearing the word in plural, as if my son had become an accessory to someone else's design. We built a checklist together at my kitchen table. Keep a small notebook in my purse for observations. Take photos of envelopes or packages when appropriate. Save receipts. Ask simple, harmless questions that encourage them to talk. All of it felt strange, like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. But I reminded myself that nothing about my life fit anymore. I was moving in the shadows of my own family. By noon, I was standing outside the bank again. Harold greeted me with the same steady presence. Back so soon? He asked gently. I need to set up alerts, I said. Any transaction above a certain amount. And I need a freeze option available on short notice. He nodded, guiding me through each step. He didn't pry. He didn't ask why. His professionalism was a gift that morning. When the system finally confirmed the new settings, he paused. Ms. Blake, he said, if anything feels wrong, call me immediately. I thanked him, touched by the small kindness. On my way home, I rehearsed the role I needed to play. A woman who knew nothing, a mother who trusted, a visitor who smiled politely. Every gesture would have to be measured. I stopped by the grocery store and picked up a few items I didn't need, simply to steady myself in the mundane. Normal life felt like something I had to practice, like a language I had forgotten. That afternoon, Marcus called. His voice sounded rushed, slightly irritated. Mom, he said, did you do something to your account? I tried to check something this morning, but it didn't go through. My heart skipped, but I softened my tone. Oh? I haven't done anything, I said, letting my voice float lightly. Maybe the bank was doing updates. You know how slow things can get. He hesitated, weighing my response, listening for cracks. Yeah, maybe, he said. Anyway, Serena wants to know if you're coming over Friday. She's making dinner. I agreed, as if nothing in my world had shifted. When the call ended, I held the phone in both hands, steadying my breath. Saying nothing was harder than shouting would have been. Silence felt like walking barefoot on gravel. That evening, Ruth came by again. We sat in the living room while the daylight faded into amber shadows along the walls. She looked at me with the kind of pride only lifelong friends can offer. You did. Well, she said, you didn't slip. I shrugged, feeling the weariness in my shoulders. It feels wrong, I admitted, pretending to trust him when he's stealing from me. Ruth placed a hand over mine. You're not pretending trust, she said. You're buying time. There's a difference. Later, when she left, I found myself wandering through the quiet rooms of my house, touching small things Henry and I had collected over the years. A ceramic bowl from a road trip, a framed photograph of us behind the pharmacy counter. These pieces reminded me who I had been and who I still was beneath the shock. The next morning, I returned to the bank, this time with a thin plan forming in my mind. I wanted to create something that looked appealing to anyone watching my accounts, something small enough to lure, but noticeable enough to reveal movement. Harold listened as I explained what I needed. He didn't question it. He simply nodded and set it up. A small amount left available, the rest secured. A quiet shield. Walking out of the bank, I felt a steady warmth replace the fear that had lived in my chest since that afternoon in Marcus's hallway. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I was preparing, shaping my steps with thought instead of panic. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house, not because it needed it, but because the rhythm steadied me. The soft scrape of the broom, the gentle thud of drawers closing, the hum of the dishwasher. These sounds reminded me that some parts of life were still mine. As I folded laundry, I rehearsed my lines for Friday's dinner. Questions disguised as conversation, smiles that revealed nothing, calm gestures masking observation. Before bed, I slipped Henry's watch onto my wrist for the first time in years. The leather felt strange, but comforting. The ticking was faint, but steady. A reminder that movement didn't have to be loud to be powerful. A reminder that I was not a woman built to collapse. When I turned off the light, I felt something different settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, but resolve. I had a plan, and I would follow it. I woke early the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt since all of this began. The sky outside was a pale, unfinished blue, the kind that always made Henry say the day hadn't chosen its mood yet. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my fingers as the plan Ruth and I formed took its final shape in my mind. Today would not be about emotion. Today would be about structure. Paper, procedure, the kinds of things Serena never expected me to understand. By 9 o'clock, I was back at the bank. Harold greeted me with the same calm steadiness, and I felt a wave of reassurance just walking past the glass doors. The world felt more orderly inside a place where numbers obeyed rules. "Morning, Miss Blake," he said. "What can I do for you today?" I set my purse down and pulled out the papers we had been building. "I need these scanned and sent to the fraud department," I said, "and I'd like them forwarded to the county's financial crimes division." Harold nodded slowly. "Understood," he said. "This is about the transfers we discussed?" His discretion was a blessing. "Yes," I whispered, "but I prefer not to use names yet." He guided me to a small room with frosted windows, and we went through every line, every signature, every timestamp. I watched him highlight sections and type annotations. When he finished, he looked at me with a kind of respectful concern. "I'll send these over," he said. "But someone will likely contact you. Be prepared to explain what you know." I took a breath. "I'm ready," I said. The words surprised me, but they were true. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. The number was from the county office. I stepped into my living room and answered. "Ms. Blake?" The voice was crisp, firm, professional. "This is Isabel Ramirez. I'm the assistant district attorney for Elder Financial Protection. Harold Cole forwarded your documents. I'd like to meet with you this afternoon." Her tone radiated steady authority. Not aggressive, not patronizing, just matter of fact, the way someone speaks when they know the weight of the work they do. "Of course," I said. "Whatever time works for you." She gave me an appointment and the address, an office downtown near the courthouse. When I hung up, I exhaled slowly, feeling my heart beat in heavy, deliberate thuds. This was real, not suspicion, not fear. This was the beginning of the system recognizing what had been done to me. I spent the next hour choosing what to wear, surprising even myself with the care I took. Not vanity, presentation. Something that said I was not fragile, even if part of me still felt thin around the edges. I settled on a soft blue blouse Henry had always liked, and a cardigan I reserved for important days. When I arrived at the office, the receptionist welcomed me warmly. "ADA Ramirez will see you shortly," she said. I sat in a chair that felt too low, my knees slightly angled upward. As if the building wanted me to feel small, I straightened my posture anyway. When Ramirez appeared, she extended her hand. She was in her early 50s, hair pulled into a neat twist, blazer pressed, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Ms. Blake," she said, "come with me." Her office was orderly, the walls lined with framed certificates and photographs of past cases. She gestured for me to sit. "I've reviewed the documents," she said, folding her hands. "And I need to ask you some questions." I nodded. "Ask whatever you need." She began with the most basic details, dates, accounts, family relationships, but then her questions grew narrower. "Has your son ever had access to your financial information?" "Yes." "Has his wife ever discussed your accounts with you directly?" "Yes." "Have you noticed any unusual behavior recently?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I overheard them discussing money. They didn't know I was there." A flicker crossed her eyes, not surprise, but recognition. "Miss Blake," she said gently, "I want you to understand something very important. What you're describing is a common pattern in elder exploitation cases, especially when a caregiver or family member believes they have control or entitlement. You did the right thing coming forward." The words settled deep inside me, equal parts validation and sorrow. I never wanted to think my own child could. My voice broke before I could finish. She leaned forward slightly. "You're not alone," she said, "and you're not responsible for their choices." She opened a folder and slid a paper toward me. "There's another matter I need to make you aware of," she said. "Your daughter-in-law's name has come up before." I stared at the page. Names, dates, a small, nearly forgotten case involving an older man 2 years ago. The same last name, Vale. My breath caught. "You're saying she's done this before?" Ramirez nodded calmly. "There was not enough evidence to prosecute then, but your case might change that." My pulse quickened, but not from fear, from clarity. This was bigger than me, and suddenly I felt a responsibility heavier than the betrayal itself. "What happens now?" I asked. She outlined the steps, compiling evidence, monitoring accounts, documenting every contact with Marcus or Serena, and allowing investigators to follow the transactions. "Your role," she said, "is to stay calm and act exactly as you have been. Do not alert them. Your silence is important." I nodded. The strange calm I'd felt before returned, settling into my bones like a steady weight. Silence had been my survival. Now it would be my strategy. Before I left, she placed a card in my hand. "Call me if anything changes," she said, "no matter how small." Her voice softened. "You're stronger than you think." I walked out of the office into the afternoon light, feeling both fragile and fortified. On my drive home, Marcus called. "Mom?" he said, trying to sound casual. Did you check your email? Something weird happened with one of your transfers. The bank said there was a block. I breathed in slowly and kept my voice even. Oh, I didn't notice, I said. Everything looks normal on my end. He paused, listening again for cracks. Okay, well, just keep an eye on things. I will, I said gently. Thank you for helping me with all this. The quiet in the car felt thick as fog after I hung up. He had no idea that every word he said was now evidence. Every hesitation, every question, every attempt to check my awareness. They all added to a growing pattern I couldn't ignore. When I reached home, I sat at the edge of my bed and let the day settle. The fear was still there, yes, but layered now with purpose. I had not broken. I had stepped forward, and I knew, with chilling clarity, that this was only the beginning. The next morning brought a heavy sky, the kind that presses down on your shoulders before you even walk outside. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook open, writing down every detail Ramirez told me to track. Dates, times, transfers, conversations. I wrote slowly, deliberately, the way Henry always wrote grocery lists, as if each item mattered more than it appeared. Halfway down the page, my phone vibrated. It was an unknown number from my county. I answered with a cautious hello. Ms. Blake, this is Ada Ramirez. I need you to come in again today. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Her tone was calm, but carried a weight I couldn't read. I agreed without hesitation. After I hung up, I tied my scarf, grabbed my purse, and stood in front of the mirror for a moment. I didn't look like a woman preparing for a legal battle. I looked like a grandmother heading to lunch after church. Maybe that was part of my armor. Maybe that was the point. The drive downtown was quiet. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, thinking of all the conversations I had replayed in my mind since the day I heard Marcus laugh. Words that made sense suddenly looked different in hindsight, like puzzle pieces flipped to reveal an entirely different image. I parked outside the county building and walked through the sliding glass doors, feeling every year of my age but refusing to let those years slow me down. Ramirez met me at the entrance. Thank you for coming, she said. He's waiting inside. I followed her down a long hallway, past offices with frosted windows, until we reached a conference room. Inside sat an older man, neat gray hair, a pressed shirt, and hands folded tightly in his lap. His posture was straight, but his eyes carried a sadness that felt familiar in a way that chilled me. He stood when we walked in. Ms. Blake, Ramirez said. This is Lionel Finch. He nodded politely. Thank you for coming, he said. His voice trembled on the last word. I took a seat across from him, and Ramirez sat beside me. The room felt too quiet, like a place where truths settle before they're spoken. I understand you were affected, I said softly. He took a breath, steadying himself. Affected, he repeated. That's one word for it. His fingers twisted together as if trying to hold something fragile. 2 years ago, my son married a woman named Serena. The air in my lungs froze. The name felt colder spoken by a stranger. She was charming, he continued. Kind at first, smart, knew how to talk about money in a way that made you feel like she understood your future better than you did. He swallowed hard. Then one day, I discovered several accounts drained. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. I confronted my son, but he insisted she was helping, that I was confused. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't confused. I was being taken apart piece by piece. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes. Did the authorities help you? I asked. There wasn't enough evidence then, he said. She was careful, meticulous, always one step ahead. The case was closed. My son divorced her months later, after he realized she'd used him too. He exhaled a long, defeated sigh. I thought it was over, until Ramirez called and told me your story. I glanced at Ramirez. She nodded. I brought Mr. Finch in because his testimony helps establish a pattern. It also gives you a clearer picture of what we're dealing with. Lionel leaned forward, his voice lowering. She will not stop. She never has. She chooses people who trust easily, people who don't like making noise, people like us. I felt those last words lodge deep in my chest. People like us. He continued. I lost more than money. I lost my son for a long time. It took him months to rebuild himself after she left. But what she did to me... He paused, fighting for breath. It stayed with me. The shame, the disbelief, the loneliness. I nodded slowly, feeling tears gathering along the rim of my eyelids. I know that loneliness, I whispered. It feels like walking through your own home and not recognizing anything anymore. Yes, he said, exactly that. For a moment, we sat in silence. Two people who had never met before today, connected by the same wound created by the same hands. Ramirez placed a folder on the table and slid it toward me. Inside were copies of Lionel's previous statements, bank activity logs, and photographs of documents Serena had once signed under different names. Seeing her signature in bold print made something inside me shudder. It was real, all of it. The betrayal, the scheme, the pattern. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't a foolish old woman who didn't understand money. I was someone who had been targeted. I'm so sorry, I said to Lionel. He gave a small, sad smile. Don't be, he replied. Use my story. If it helps you get justice, then something good will come from what she did. He reached into his pocket and slid a small flash drive across the table. These are phone logs and copies of messages she sent during my situation, he said. I kept them in case anyone ever needed them. Please make sure they go to the right hands. Ramirez took the drive. This will help, she said. More than you know. Lionel stood, smoothing his shirt. If you ever need someone to talk to, he said, looking at me, I'm here. We survivors have to look after each other. The word survivors hit me squarely in the chest. I nodded with more emotion than I intended. Thank you, I said. After he left, Ramirez turned to me. This is bigger than a family dispute, she said. This is a pattern of exploitation. With your case, we may finally have enough to move forward. Her words filled me with something I hadn't felt in days, resolve with direction. She continued, Your help, your documentation, your silence so far, these are crucial. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. On my way home, I stopped by the park. I sat on a bench under a willow tree and watched the branches sway. I thought about Lionel's trembling hands, his steady voice, the tired hollow behind his eyes. Serena had left marks on him the way she was leaving marks on me. But he was still standing, and so was I. I felt the loneliness shift inside me, becoming something else, something stronger. I wasn't alone, and now that I knew the truth, I would not let her destroy someone else. Not again. A wind swept across the park, lifting a few leaves from the ground. I closed my eyes and whispered into the breeze. It ends with us. I arrived at Ramirez's office the next morning with a quiet heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes from knowing the next steps aren't just about protection anymore. They're about exposing something larger. When I walked through the lobby doors, Ethan Cruz was already waiting. I knew it was him because he carried himself the way former officers often do. Shoulders steady, eyes always scanning, every gesture purposeful. Ramirez had told me he was the investigator assigned to my case, but meeting him in person made everything feel more concrete. He greeted me with a polite nod. "Ms. Blake," he said, "I'm Ethan. I've been briefed on your situation. I'm going to start tracking movements and gathering verification." His voice was gentle in a way I didn't expect. Not patronizing, not pitying, just careful. I appreciated that. People my age can tell when someone is speaking down to them, and he wasn't. Ramirez joined us and led us into a small conference room. A whiteboard filled one wall, marked with dates, account numbers, and a few arrows connecting names. Serena's name was there, written in marker, underlined twice. Seeing it in plain ink made my heartbeat pulse in my throat. "We've begun mapping the activity," Ramirez explained. "Today, Ethan will go over the collection plan with you." I sat, folding my hands, steadying my breath. "I'll do whatever is needed," I said. Ethan clicked open a slim silver laptop and turned it toward me. "Here's what we know," he said. "Your funds moved through 3 accounts. 2 are in Serena's name. 1 is in Marcus's. We need proof linking their physical actions to these transactions. That's where I come in." He tapped a screen showing a small map of ATM locations across the city. Red dots were scattered across it like drops of paint. "I'll start with security footage from these points," he said. "If Serena or Marcus accessed any of these machines around the time of the transfers, that gives us a tangible trail." I nodded slowly. It made sense. Numbers were one thing, images were another. I felt both dread and relief at once, relief that someone was finally doing this work for me, dread that each piece of proof would confirm what my heart still fought to believe. Ethan gathered his files and looked at me. "I'll keep you updated. And if you remember anything at all, call me." I watched him leave with a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude because I finally had someone skilled walking on the battlefield with me. Fear because evidence meant the truth was permanent. I decided to stop by the grocery store on my way home, partly out of habit, partly because walking among shelves and normal people helped me breathe. I was looking at a box of tea when my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. It was a photo. I opened it slowly. There was Marcus, standing at an ATM illuminated by the dull glow of the machine. His head was bowed, shoulders tense, the screen reflecting faintly across his face. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him without the filter of motherhood for the first time. Below the image, Ethan had written, "Timestamp aligns with one of the withdrawals. Continuing to gather." I pressed my hand against my chest, steadying myself. The photo wasn't violent or dramatic. It was ordinary, too ordinary for what it represented. A son withdrawing his mother's life, one keypad touch at a time. I texted back a simple "thank you." Anything more would have broken me in the middle of the tea aisle. Later that afternoon, I visited Gloria, my neighbor. I didn't plan to tell her anything. I just needed human company. She opened the door with tired eyes, but offered a soft smile. "Come in, Bea," she said, stepping aside. Her living room smelled like lavender and old books. She poured us both glasses of iced tea and sat across from me. "I heard cars at Marcus's place yesterday. she said casually. More than usual. I paused, unsure if I should respond. Then she leaned in slightly. You know, she said softly, I've heard them argue, several times, loud enough that I had to close my windows. My breath caught. You did? I whispered. She nodded, fiddling with her ring. I didn't want to get involved. I thought maybe it was just normal married stuff. But those weren't normal arguments, Bea. They were sharp, panicked, about money. She swallowed. I should have told you earlier. Her voice carried guilt. I placed my hand over hers. Thank you for telling me now, I said. That matters. She exhaled shakily, relief settling over her shoulders. If you ever need me to say something, officially, I will. The offer hung between us, fragile and brave. I didn't push further. Not yet. But I knew that when the time came, her voice could matter more than she realized. That evening, I returned home to another update from Ethan. More photographs, parking lot footage, Serena stepping out of a car, sunglasses perched high, holding a small bag. Another image zoomed in on a receipt sticking out from the bag, jewelry store branding faint but visible. Tracked her to a boutique, the message read. Item purchased with funds connected to transfer, clocking patterns. I studied the image for a long time. Serena looked confident, unbothered, untouched by guilt. The kind of woman who planned her steps with precision and never looked back to see who she stepped on. The tightness in my chest returned. Not fear this time, but something steelier. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the way she moved through life, leaving people hollow in her wake. I refused to be another hollow. At sunset, Ethan called. We found more, he said. His voice was calm but edged with something, maybe urgency, maybe concern. We located surveillance showing Marcus accessing an ATM at 2:40 in the morning last week. That lines up with a transfer. I'll send it to ADA Ramirez. I gripped the phone. What? What does he look like? My voice was thin. Ethan hesitated. Tired, he said finally. And nervous. I closed my eyes. That description hurt more than anything else. Nervous meant he knew he was doing something wrong. Tired meant he had chosen it anyway. Before we hung up, he added, Gloria mentioned she's willing to talk. That could help your case significantly. I looked out the window at the darkening sky. The world felt different. Sharper edges, clearer shapes. Every piece was falling into place, bit by careful bit. Painful, yes, but necessary. As I turned off the lights for the night, I whispered softly into the quiet rooms of my house. Thank you, Henry. Thank you for teaching me how to stand steady. I climbed into bed with a mixture of sorrow and strength woven together, no longer separate threads. Evidence was building. People were stepping forward. The truth was coming into focus. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed deeply that justice was no longer a distant idea. It was approaching. I stood outside Marcus's house on Friday evening with a container of homemade soup in my hands and a carefully rehearsed smile on my face. The porch light flickered the way it always had, glowing weakly like an old star losing its shine. I took a breath and reminded myself of the rules. Stay calm, stay warm, stay ordinary. I could not let them see the storm I was carrying inside. I rang the doorbell. Marcus opened the door after a moment. His eyes looked tired, shadowed, as if sleep had been something he borrowed instead of owned. But he tried to smile. Hey, Mom, he said. Come in. His voice wavered just slightly, enough for me to hear what wasn't being said. I stepped inside, letting the familiar but changed air wrap around me. Serena was in the kitchen, her movements precise as she plated appetizers. "B," she said brightly, "so glad you came." She kissed the air beside my cheek, a gesture that meant nothing. I returned the smile I had prepared, the one that balanced warmth with ignorance. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. "I brought soup." She praised the gesture with exaggerated enthusiasm, but her eyes scanned me with quiet suspicion, the way someone checks a locked door twice before leaving home. I felt Ruth's advice settle into my spine. Be softer than they expect. Softer, quieter, unreadable. We sat down for dinner. The table was set with candles and glassware, arranged neatly as if this were a celebration instead of a theater. I spooned soup into my bowl while Marcus pushed his food around without eating. His hand trembled once, enough for me to catch it. I pretended not to notice. "So, B," Serena began, sliding into her seat with effortless poise. "Have you had any trouble with your accounts lately? Marcus mentioned the bank might have done maintenance." Her tone was light, but the question was a net thrown into calm water. I stirred my soup slowly. "Oh, nothing unusual," I said. "I didn't even check. I trust things work themselves out." I kept my tone simple, mild. Serena's eyes flickered, the faintest hesitation in her smile. She hadn't expected me to sound so unconcerned, or so unaware. I let a gentle laugh escape. "Honestly, I barely understand half of what the bank does these days." It was the kind of sentence she wanted to hear, and I watched her shoulders soften. Marcus, however, seemed less at ease. He cleared his throat, shifted in his chair, then reached for his drink with a hand that shook more visibly now. The conversation drifted to ordinary topics: weather, neighbors, a new restaurant. I nodded at each turn, cataloging every detail. I noticed the small stack of unopened mail near the countertop, Marcus's marriage photo, where his smile looked forced, and a faint tension in the air that smelled like something breaking slowly. At one point, Marcus stepped outside to take a call. Through the partially closed door, I heard his voice crack. "I can't keep doing this," he said, almost whispering. "I can't." His words were frayed, worn thin by fear and guilt. I stared at my plate, my breath shallow. Serena glanced toward the doorway, her jaw tightening. When she realized I had noticed, she forced a smile. "He's been so stressed at work," she said. "You know how men are." I nodded, offering another soft lie. "Of course." But inside me a cord pulled taut. I wanted to stand, to shake him, to tell him I knew everything, but I couldn't. Not yet. Silence was painful, but it had purpose. He returned minutes later, eyes rimmed with something close to panic. He sat down without speaking, his fork clinking too loudly against his plate. I watched him with the ache only a mother can carry. The ache of seeing your child split between who they were and who they've become. After dinner, Serena busied herself in the kitchen. Marcus lingered in the living room, rubbing his temples. I saw his phone lying on the coffee table, the screen lighting up briefly with a notification. A name flashed across it, one I recognized from the investigation. My breath caught, but I kept my face soft. "Mom?" he said suddenly. His voice was small, young, nothing like the man who had laughed on the phone days earlier. "Do you ever feel like things get out of hand before you even notice they're going wrong?" The question almost broke me. I kept my tone gentle. "Everyone feels that way sometimes." He looked up at me then, really looked. And for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who saved dandelions from the lawnmower, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after long days. His mouth opened as if he wanted to confess something, But Serena called from the kitchen before he could speak. "Marcus, can you help me with this?" His jaw clenched. He nodded and stood, leaving the half-formed confession behind him like a shadow. I sat alone in the living room, fingers interlaced tightly. My heart ached with the weight of every unspoken truth. My phone buzzed quietly in my purse. It was a message from Ethan. "I retrieved something important. You need to hear this later." My pulse quickened. The timing felt sharp, almost fated. When I left that night, Marcus walked me to the door. The porch light buzzed faintly above us. He kept his arms folded, as if holding himself together. "Drive safe, Mom," he said softly. "I will," I replied. "You take care of yourself." He nodded, but didn't look at me. His guilt hung between us, thick and heavy. I stepped into the night air, letting the cool breeze meet my skin. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not yet. At home, I changed into my nightgown and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were still trembling when I reached for my phone. Ethan had sent a second message. Audio file attached, from Marcus's cloud backup. I put on my reading glasses, braced myself, and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room, raw, unsteady. "I laughed," he said. "I shouldn't have. I don't even know why. I panicked. I'm scared. I don't know how to fix any of this. I know Mom doesn't deserve it. I know it. I hate myself for what I've done." I covered my mouth with both hands, breath breaking silently. My son, my boy, was crumbling under the weight of his own choices. "I'm sorry," he whispered at the end of the recording. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself cry. A quiet, trembling cry that shook from a place deeper than anger. It was grief, pure and heavy. But beneath the grief, something else kindled again. Resolve. This was no longer just about what they had taken. It was about who I needed to be to stop it. The morning after I heard Marcus's broken confession, I woke with a heaviness that felt older than my bones. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the soft light from the window touch my hands before I reached for Henry's watch on the nightstand. I fastened it slowly, the leather cool against my wrist. Time. That was what today was about. The right time. The final moment when everything Serena had built on lies would finally crack. My phone buzzed just after 8. It was Ramirez. Her tone was brisk, steady, centered. "Ms. Blake, we've verified a planned departure. Serena booked a one-way ticket for this afternoon. Terminal 2, Gate 47. She's planning to leave the country." I inhaled sharply. "Does Marcus know?" There was a pause. "We believe he does. He purchased luggage yesterday. They're moving fast. We need to act now." My pulse quickened, but not with fear, something closer to finality. "What do you need from me?" I asked Ed. "Nothing on site," she said. "This could get intense, and we don't want you near that. But you do need to stay available. If the judge signs the seizure order, we'll need you to confirm a few items." I knew exactly which items she meant. The transfers, the evidence, and possibly Henry's watch. Because if the investigators found it, it would tie everything together. After the call, I stood in my kitchen gripping the counter. The world felt like it was shifting beneath my feet, not violently but with purpose, like the slow turn of a boat docking. I whispered to Henry's memory, "It's happening. We're almost there." Ethan called next. "I'm heading with Ramirez to the airport," he said. "PD will meet us there. She'll try to run. People like her always do." His voice carried a faint breath of resolve. like he'd walked this path many times before. "I'll update you as we move." I dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, something steady, something that made me feel grounded. I paced my living room, waiting, listening to the clock tick. Minutes stretched out like long shadows. I checked the window, the phone, the watch. Time felt louder than usual, each second an audible reminder that years of trust had led to this one afternoon. Around noon, Ramirez sent a text. "We're in position." I imagined them weaving through the crowds at the airport, the rolling suitcases, the scattered announcements echoing overhead, Serena moving with that sharp elegance she always carried, oblivious to what waited for her. I walked into my backyard and sat on the old wooden bench Henry built years ago. The world was quiet, except for the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional chirp of a bird. I tried to breathe. I tried to be still, but every part of me felt suspended in midair. Then my phone rang sharply. "Ethan." "It's happening," he said, his voice low, urgent. "She's here. She's checking in at the counter." I closed my eyes, imagining Serena in one of her pressed blouses, hair immaculate, handing over a passport with cool indifference. "Marcus is with her," he continued. "He looks conflicted, shaken." A flash of pain went through me, sharp and bright. Even now, even after everything, hearing that he was there beside her made my heart twist. I heard muffled shouting in the background, a burst of movement. Then Ethan's voice returned. "We're moving in." I stood from the bench without realizing it, my entire body tensing as if bracing for impact. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Officers approached her," he said. "She's arguing, insisting she has rights. They've secured her passport. Marcus is stepping back. He looks pale. They're opening her luggage now." I gripped the phone tightly. "Do they see anything?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear airport noise on the other end. Then, "They found cash, several envelopes, jewelry, and—" His breath hitched slightly. "A watch." I froze. Henry's watch. The one Marcus had taken from my home years earlier, claiming he wanted to have it repaired. The one Serena used as bait to make me believe she valued family history. Hearing it had surfaced now, in her suitcase, made something inside me collapse and rebuild at the same time. "That watch," Ethan said softly, "is registered in your estate records. It's listed as a significant personal asset. This ties Marcus directly." My hand covered my mouth. Tears gathered instantly, warm and heavy. "Are they arresting him too?" I asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "Possession of stolen property linked to financial crimes. They're detaining both. Serena is yelling. Marcus isn't resisting." For a moment, the world felt silent except for my heartbeat. "Is he okay?" I whispered. "As okay as someone in his position can be," Ethan said gently. "He looks relieved almost, like something he's been holding on to finally snapped." I sank onto the bench again, the wood solid beneath me. It felt surreal. This moment I had anticipated with dread and certainty. The moment justice began to walk toward me after circling for so long. Then Ramirez came on the line. "Ms. Blake, we need you to confirm a few items found in the luggage." I answered each question carefully, tears slipping down my cheeks. Yes, that was Henry's watch. Yes, the cash amounts were consistent with the transfers. Yes, the jewelry pieces matched items purchased with my funds. When the call ended, I sat alone in the backyard, letting the sun warm my face while the weight of the moment settled. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released, as if the invisible hand squeezing my chest for weeks finally loosened its grip. Hours later, Ramirez called again. "They've been processed," she said. "Your case is officially active. You did the right thing." I nodded silently, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you," I whispered. That evening, as dusk softened the edges of my house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The world outside looked ordinary. Children playing on bicycles, dogs barking, a neighbor watering her plants. Nothing about my neighborhood had changed, yet everything inside me had. I pressed Henry's watch to my heart and closed my eyes. Time had not been my enemy. Time had been my witness. And now, finally, it was on my side. News travels fast in a small community, but nothing travels faster than scandal tied to a familiar name. By the next morning, reports had bloomed across local channels and neighborhood feeds like wildfire. I woke to a phone buzzing nonstop, each vibration pulling me from sleep like a gentle alarm. When I finally reached for it, the first thing I saw was a headline: "Local couple arrested at airport in financial exploitation case." The article didn't mention my name, but the street, the ages, and the brief description were enough that anyone who knew us could connect the dots. I sat up slowly, my heart thudding in a dull rhythm. I had expected it. I had prepared for it. But knowing something is coming is very different from watching it unfold right at your doorstep. Ruth called first. "B, are you all right?" she asked without preamble. "I'm holding together," I said, though my voice felt like it carried 1,000 small fractures. "Just trying to breathe." "I saw the news," she said, her tone softening. "People will talk. They always do. Don't let any of it sink into your bones." I promised her I wouldn't, though of course some pieces already had. After we hung up, I walked to the living room window and peeked through the blinds. 2 neighbors were outside, heads bent close together, their voices carried faintly through the glass. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were discussing. People my age have a way of reading conversations even from a distance. I wasn't angry at them. Shock always seeks an outlet, and gossip is the easiest form of release. Still, the sting of it pressed against me. A few hours later, someone knocked. I opened the door to find Gloria standing on my porch. She clutched a cardigan tightly around herself, as if shielding against something unseen. "B," she whispered, "I'm so sorry about everything." Her eyes were watery, guilt swimming just beneath the surface. I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She hesitated, then shook her head gently. I'm not staying. I just wanted to tell you something." I waited. "I saw the news," she said, "and I realized something. I've been quiet for too long. I heard the arguments. I heard the way they spoke about money, about pressure, about you. And I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. But it was. I should have done something sooner." Her voice trembled. I reached out and lightly touched her arm. "You're here now," I said. "That matters." She swallowed hard. "I want to make a statement. If it helps your case, I'll do it. I'll tell the truth." The courage in her eyes was fragile and fierce at the same time. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "I'm tired of being afraid." She squeezed my hand before leaving, and as her footsteps retreated, something inside me steadied. One voice could shift the balance. One truth could add weight where it was needed. Throughout the day, messages from acquaintances trickled in, some concerned, some curious, some disguised judgment under polite language. I responded only to a few, keeping my words gentle and brief. I had no interest in telling the story before it was time. Around midday, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Ramirez. Media attention rising. Stay composed. Gloria's statement is extremely helpful. That small confirmation lifted something in me. I walked into my backyard, the same place where I had waited during the airport sting, and let the breeze touch my skin. The willow tree in the corner rustled lightly, and I found myself taking comfort in its steady sway. In the afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a young reporter introduced himself. "Miss Blake, I understand you may be connected to the individuals arrested yesterday. Would you be willing to comment?" I closed my eyes briefly. "No," I said calmly. "Thank you for reaching out, but I won't be making any statements." He tried again, wording his questions differently, but I stayed firm. Eventually, he thanked me and hung up. I felt a tremor of relief knowing I had protected the integrity of the investigation. The truth belonged in a courtroom, not in a headline. Later that evening, I drove to Lionel's house after he texted that he had something to show me. His home was modest, the kind of place built on years of frugality and habit. He greeted me at the door with a warm but weary smile. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His living room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He motioned toward a set of printouts on his coffee table. These are people who contacted me today," he said. "After the news story." He lifted one page. "Some of them think they might have been targeted too. Others just wanted to thank me for speaking up." I looked at the papers. Names, messages, notes. The weight of it all settled on me. This wasn't just about Marcus or Serena anymore. This was about a pattern stretching beyond our families. "We need to do something for them," Lionel said quietly. "A place for people to talk, to understand what happened to them." My heart softened. "We will," I said. "Together." As we talked, the idea formed naturally. A small support group at the community center, a place for people to gather and share stories without shame. Healing doesn't come from silence. It comes from being heard. Before I left, Lionel handed me one more sheet of paper, a statement he had prepared for Ramirez. "For the court," he said. "Their lawyers will try to minimize what she did. I want the record to reflect the truth." I hugged him gently. "Thank you," I said, "for being brave." Driving home as evening shadows lengthened, I saw several porch lights flick on, illuminating doorways and familiar sidewalks. The neighborhood had not changed, but I had. I felt less alone, less hidden behind the shame of what had been done to me. Community had stepped forward. Truth had stepped forward. When I returned home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and replayed the day in my mind. People had begun to align beside me. Gloria, Lionel, even strangers. The world was stirring, recognizing the wrong that had been done. I lifted my cup, letting the warmth settle into my palms. I had once thought this fight belonged only to me, but today I saw the truth. I was part of something much bigger, and the world around me was finally beginning to open its eyes. I woke before sunrise, the sky still wrapped in that quiet blue-gray that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples as the memories of the airport arrests replayed in my mind like a muted film. Even in sleep, the image of Henry's watch in Serena's suitcase echoed through me. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. But the truth, as I was learning, rarely arrives as relief. It arrives as weight. I reached for my robe, slipped it over my shoulders, and walked to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustle of the early morning breeze. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, watching the first hints of gold stretch across the horizon. Today, Ramirez had said, they would go over the collected materials. Today, I would hear everything, every message, every confirmation, every detail I had avoided imagining fully. I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of how much of it would sound like my son. By 9 o'clock, I was in the county building again, the air crisp with the smell of old paper and disinfectant. Ramirez greeted me with a nod. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Blake. We have several items to review today. I want you to be prepared." Prepared. The word sat heavy in my chest. We walked into a conference room where Ethan was already seated, a laptop open and several files arranged neatly in front of him. He stood when I entered. "Morning, Ms. Blake," he said softly. "We'll take this slowly." I sat across from them, hands folded tightly in my lap. Ramirez opened a folder. "We're going to begin with communications recovered from cloud backups," she said. "Some of this will be difficult to hear. Please let me know if you need a break." I nodded. My throat felt tight. Ethan clicked a button on the laptop. The first audio played. Marcus's voice filled the room, thin and strained. "I don't know what else to do," he said. "Serena said it would be simple, that Mom wouldn't notice. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought it was temporary. I didn't think she'd leave." My breath caught. Hearing him speak like that, alone, frightened, was like watching a photograph fade into something bruised and unrecognizable. Another audio clip followed. Serena's voice this time, sharp and impatient. "Don't be dramatic, Marcus. It's money. She won't miss it. And if she does, we'll say it was a technical issue. You worry too much." I felt my fingers curl into my palm. The coldness in her tone made the air feel thinner. The next clip was Marcus again. "What if she finds out?" he whispered. "What if—" "She won't," Serena snapped. "Unless you screw this up." Ethan paused the recording. "This alone establishes coercion," he said. "Not absolution, but context." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Ramirez opened another file. "These are text threads between Marcus and Serena in the days leading up to the transfers." She slid copies toward me. My eyes scanned the lines. "Marcus, are you sure we should do this? She trusted me." Serena, "Do you want a future or not? She doesn't need that money. We do." Marcus, "This doesn't feel right." Serena, "Stop acting like a child. Just send it." Each word felt like a pin pushed deeper beneath my skin. I had known Serena was the architect, but seeing Marcus wrestle with his choices he still made, was its own kind of heartbreak. Ramirez watched me closely. "There's more," she said softly. Ethan clicked another file. A voice memo began to play. It was Marcus again. This time his voice was raw, almost cracked. "I laughed," he said, "and I hate myself for it. I was scared. Serena kept saying everything would be fine. I didn't know how to get out. I know Mom doesn't deserve this. I know. I don't know how to undo it." I closed my eyes. The sound of his pain cut through me deeper than anger ever could. "I'm sorry," he whispered at the end. When the recording stopped, the room was silent except for the soft whir of the HVAC system. I pressed my hands to my lips, fighting the rise of emotion pressing against my ribs. "Ms. Blake," Ramirez said gently, "we brought you here not to wound you, but because this helps us determine charges." Marcus acted willingly, but he also acted under pressure. That will affect how the case unfolds. I nodded slowly. I understand. Ethan leaned forward. This doesn't erase what he did, he said carefully. But it explains how he got pulled into a scheme bigger than him. I stared at the table. He's still my son, I whispered. No matter what he's done. Neither of them responded. They didn't have to. Ramirez slid another paper across the table. This is the inventory of items seized from Serena's luggage. I traced my finger down the list until I found it. Henry's watch. A breath left me, soft and wounded. That watch had been a promise. A marriage. A lifetime. Seeing it on the list of seized property felt like seeing my heart cataloged as evidence. We can recover it for you, Ramirez said, once the court processes it. Thank you, I murmured. She closed the folder. One last thing. Gloria Vance filed a formal statement this morning. It corroborates the tension in the household, the financial arguments, and the atmosphere leading up to the transfers. It strengthens your case significantly. I felt a warmth spread through me. Gratitude, relief, and something like community. Please thank her for me, I said softly. Ethan leaned back. Miss Blake, you've done everything right. And today, you showed strength most people never find. I swallowed hard. It doesn't feel like strength, I said. It feels like losing my son in slow motion. Ramirez nodded with a sympathy that didn't diminish her resolve. Sometimes justice and grief walk together, she said. But you're not walking alone. I left the office with the clouds gathering above the courthouse, low and gray, as if they were bowing their heads with me. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the truth settle into its new shape. The pain was sharp, yes, but clean. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't questioning. It was clarity. Clarity hurts, but it also frees. As I drove home, I whispered into the quiet, I still love you, Marcus, but love doesn't erase what happened. The road ahead wasn't soft or easy, but it was visible. And that, after everything, was its own kind of mercy. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay down, closed my eyes, listened to the soft ticking of Henry's watch on my nightstand, and told myself to rest. But my mind kept circling the same questions, the same memories, the same ache that wouldn't release its grip. When the first light of morning crept across the ceiling, I finally gave up, slipped out of bed, and wrapped myself in my robe. Today was the day I would reveal the truth I had been holding quietly for weeks. Today, all the steps I had taken in silence would finally make sense. I made coffee but didn't drink it. My hands were too unsteady. I sat at the kitchen table with Henry's watch in front of me, tracing the familiar curve of the glass with one fingertip. You told me to keep my dignity, I whispered to the empty room. And I did. My phone buzzed. A text from Ramirez. We need updated documentation for the hearing. Bring any new papers you have. I looked toward the drawer where I kept everything. Every receipt, every statement, every small thread of caution I'd collected. But there was one document I hadn't shared with anyone. Not yet. Not until now. The trust. 2 weeks before I overheard Marcus on the phone. 2 weeks before his laugh cut through my life. 2 weeks before everything shifted beneath me. Something had pressed on my instincts. A nudge. A whisper. A moment I couldn't explain then, but understood now. I had walked into my lawyer's office with a quiet urgency, the kind that lives in the bones rather than the mind. I'd told her, I want to secure what I have. Not for my son, not right now, for my future, and for anything that might come. She had helped me create a trust. Solid, legal, binding. Most of my savings, including the bulk of the $320,000, had already been transferred into it. The money Marcus thought he had taken had not been there for days. I had moved everything before he touched a single button. And the trust wasn't just a vault. It was a map. A fund for elder support. A portion for community help. A reserve for emergencies. And a final segment, one that mattered more to me than anything, for restitution, for healing, for the possibility that one day my son might want to rebuild, but without destroying me in the process. I picked up the folder and held it against my chest. This is the part they never saw coming, I murmured. By late morning, I was seated in my lawyer's office again, the same place where the trust had been created. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old leather. The walls were lined with certificates, each one reflecting a quiet professionalism that soothed me. My lawyer, Miss Hill, looked at me over her glasses. "I've been expecting your call," she said. "I saw the news last night." "I need the finalized copies," I said, "and I need to prepare for whatever comes next." She nodded, opened her drawer, and pulled out the thick folder. "Beatrice, this document protects you entirely," she said. "Every asset moved into the trust is untouchable. It doesn't matter what he attempted. He didn't reach what wasn't there." I exhaled, the relief swelling in my chest even though the pain remained. "Thank you," I whispered. "You may have saved my future before I even knew I needed saving." On the way out of her office, I paused in the hallway. A framed quote hung on the wall. "Strength isn't loud. It's the decision to keep moving when others would stop." I traced the words lightly with my gaze. They felt written for me. I drove straight to the bank to meet Harold as well. He greeted me with that calm professionalism that had become an anchor. "Ms. Blake," he said with a small smile. "I reviewed the alert logs. Your precautions prevented any further attempts." I handed him the trust documents. "This is what I need added to my records," I said. "I want it noted clearly that these transfers were made before any suspected activity." He scanned the first page, eyebrows lifting slightly. "You were ahead of them," he murmured. "You saw it coming." I didn't correct him. I didn't know how I saw it. I only knew that something in me had whispered to move. Maybe it had been the lonely months after Henry died. Maybe it had been a mother's intuition. Maybe it had been the voicemail he left me, telling me to protect myself. Either way, I had acted. Quietly, carefully, intentionally. And it had saved my life. As I walked out of the bank, my phone rang. Marcus. The name lit up the screen with a familiarity that once comforted me and now made my breath catch. I answered softly. "Hello?" His voice was faint, trembling. "Mom, I need to ask you something. When they froze the accounts, did you move the money before I touched it?" I stopped walking. The world went still around me. Cars passed in the distance. A dog barked. Leaves rustled along the sidewalk. But inside me, everything held its breath. "Yes," I said. "I moved everything." A long, shaky exhale came through the phone. "I thought I ruined you," he whispered. I thought I took everything." "You didn't," I replied gently. "You never had what you thought you did." He was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice so small it nearly broke me, he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard. "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and I needed time." I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to protect myself. There was another pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." "I know," I whispered. "And one day, we'll talk about everything, but that day isn't today." I hung up gently, letting the silence settle. Then I looked at the sky, bright, wide, full of space I hadn't felt in weeks. That evening, I walked into his home. He and Serena weren't there anymore, of course, but the house stood exactly as it had the day he laughed over the phone. I stood in the doorway, letting the memories wash over me in a soft, aching wave. And then, in a steady voice, I spoke the words I had been waiting to say. "I moved everything yesterday," I said into the empty air, "and I'm not done." Leaving the house, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not revenge. Control. My story was no longer something happening to me. It was something I was directing. The day after I told Marcus the truth, the air felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. I woke early, sat up slowly, and listened to the familiar tick of Henry's watch on the nightstand. Each small sound felt like a reminder that time was moving, that the next steps were approaching whether I was ready or not. I took a breath, slid on my robe, and walked to the kitchen. The kettle hissed softly, and I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of tea, trying to steady myself before heading to Ramirez's office. We were scheduled to review a digital evidence packet that had arrived late the night before. I didn't know what it contained, but something in the tone of her message told me it was important. By mid-morning, I stood in the lobby of the county building again. The receptionist recognized me and gave a sympathetic nod before buzzing me in. Ramirez met me in the hallway, her expression focused. "Ms. Blake," she said, "thank you for coming on short notice. We've run into an issue." The words made my stomach tighten. She led me into the conference room where Ethan was already seated, staring at his laptop with a look that hovered between frustration and disbelief. "What happened?" I asked. Ethan turned the screen toward me. A folder labeled Victim Documentation flickered with an error message. "This wasn't like this yesterday," he said, tapping the trackpad. "The files aren't opening. Something corrupted the drive." Ramirez folded her arms, her brow furrowed. This was the summary file from Serena's digital footprint, the one that included previous victims, financial trails, email logs. It's crucial for showing repeated behavior. I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Can it be recovered?" I asked Juan. Ethan exhaled. "It depends. The drive might have been damaged before we received it, or intentionally altered." He paused. "But I'm not giving up on it." I watched him try again and again, clicking, typing commands, adjusting settings. Each attempt ended with the same error. It felt like watching a lock refuse every key. Ramirez sat beside me and spoke quietly. "This doesn't destroy the case, but it weakens our pattern evidence unless we find another source. Without those files, we rely heavily on witness testimony and bank logs. A full digital trail would strengthen everything." The thought of Serena slipping through even one crack in the system made my stomach twist. "There must be another copy," I said softly. Ethan straightened. "There might be," he said. "People like Serena keep records. They duplicate things, sometimes without realizing it." He pulled a small notebook from his bag. "I'm going to retrace her steps. Hotels, rentals, public networks, anywhere she might have logged in." Ramirez nodded. "Good. Check everything connected to her travel. She booked that flight. There may be breadcrumbs." Ethan left quickly, determination in his stride. Ramirez and I reviewed the remaining files, but the missing packet cast a shadow over everything. I held my hands together in my lap, fingers interlacing tightly. The anxiety that had eased after the arrests began settling back into place. I reminded myself that justice wasn't a straight path. It zigzagged. It faltered. It tested you. Hours passed before Ethan returned. He walked into the room with dust on his sleeves and a faint spark in his eyes. "I found something," he said, lifting a small tablet. When Serena checked into a hotel earlier this year, she used the lobby computer to confirm bookings. The hotel retains partial cloud caches. I retrieved an auto-sync log. Ramirez sat forward. "Does it contain the documents?" Ethan nodded. "A copy, yes. Not the full set, but enough." A backup file was generated automatically when she reviewed her digital folder. She probably didn't know it synced. My breath left me in a shaky wave. "Does it include the victims?" "Yes," he said. "Names, notes, amounts, enough to show a pattern anyone can recognize." Relief flooded my chest, warm and overwhelming. "You saved it," I whispered. "You saved everything." He gave a small, humble shrug. "It's what I'm here for." Ramirez opened the new file, her eyes scanning quickly. "This is strong," she said. "Very strong." We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the recovered material. I watched names appear on the screen. People like Lionel. People who never imagined someone could target them so quietly. Each name felt like a weight added to a scale that had been tipping for too long. When the review was done, Ramirez closed the laptop gently. "Miss Blake," she said, "the case is no longer fragile. We have enough now to move forward with confidence." As I left the office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. For the first time in days, the light didn't feel harsh. It felt hopeful. I drove home with the windows slightly open, letting the breeze cool the lingering tension in my chest. Halfway there, my phone buzzed with a message from Ruth. "Thinking of you. Don't forget to breathe." I smiled softly. Some messages arrive like small anchors, steadying you before the waves return. When I reached home, I sat on the porch steps, letting the last light settle over the yard. The neighborhood was quiet, the air warm against my skin. I thought about the corrupt file, the panic that flared when I saw the error message, the way Ethan had refused to let the case unravel. And I realized something important. Sometimes salvation doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in persistence, in people who refuse to give up, in small, steady acts that rebuild what others tried to break. As the sun dipped below the trees, I whispered into the quiet, "We're almost there, Henry. Almost." The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of scent that settles into your memory whether you want it to or not. I walked through the metal detector with my hands clasped tightly in front of me, trying to keep my breath slow and steady. Henry's watch pressed warm against my wrist, reminding me that time couldn't be rushed or slowed, only moved through with intention. Today was the day everything we had gathered, every receipt, every photo, every whispered truth, would stand in the light. Today, the story I had carried alone would finally be spoken aloud. Ruth was already waiting in the Siki hallway. She hugged me gently, careful not to overwhelm me with the emotion shining in her eyes. "You're ready," she said, "and you're not doing this alone." I nodded, swallowing hard. A few steps away, Lionel was seated on a bench, hands folded in his lap, posture perfectly straight. His eyes met mine, and he offered a warm, encouraging nod. In that small gesture, I felt a shared strength. Two people marked by the same wound, now standing as witnesses for each other. When the bailiff finally opened the doors, people began to file into the courtroom. I found my seat beside Ramirez and Ethan. Both of them carried the calm focus of people who had walked this path many times before. I envied their steadiness, but I was also grateful for it. It made the room feel less overwhelming. Across the aisle, Marcus sat beside his attorney. His hands were clasped tightly, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He didn't look up when I entered. Serena, seated next to her own lawyer, looked entirely different. Rigid, jaw set, eyes darting with calculation. She wore a crisp blouse and a cold expression, as if she believed she still had control over the narrative. But there was strain in her posture, a tension she couldn't quite hide. The judge entered, and we all rose. The proceedings began with formalities, then shifted quickly into the first presentation of evidence. Ramirez stood and addressed the court, her voice steady and sharp. "Your Honor, what you will hear today is not a misunderstanding. This is a deliberate pattern of exploitation directed toward vulnerable individuals, executed with precision, and repeated over several years." She began with the bank records. Harold had provided everything: timestamps, flag transfers, logs showing my account freezes, and copies of rejected attempts to move additional funds. They appeared on the courtroom screen one after another, each number a stark reminder of the betrayal I had lived through. I forced myself to watch every line. I owed myself that. Then came Ethan's collection. The photographs from the ATM, time-stamped and clear. Marcus in the dim glow of the machine. Serena entering a jewelry store with a small envelope. The images flickered across the screen, filling the room with undeniable proof. I didn't look at Marcus while they were shown. I didn't trust myself to. Gloria was called next. She walked to the stand with trembling hands but lifted her chin with quiet bravery. Her voice wavered at first as she described the arguments she'd overheard through thin walls. Voices raised, mentions of money, the tension that seeped through the air. But as she continued, her voice grew steadier. When she finished, she looked toward me briefly, her eyes soft with apology and courage. I offered her a gentle nod, gratitude swelling in my chest. Then it was Lionel's turn. He moved to the stand with the dignity of someone who had learned to carry pain without letting it corrode his spirit. He spoke calmly about his past, the way Serena had manipulated him, the financial losses he suffered, and the emotional toll that lingered long after she disappeared. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He simply told the truth. Every word felt like a light guiding the court toward understanding the full scope of what had been done. When my name was called, I rose slowly. My legs felt heavy but steady, like pillars that had spent months learning how to hold. I took the oath, sat down, and faced the courtroom. Ramirez began. "Ms. Blake, please describe the events leading to the discovery of the transfers." I recounted everything: the forgotten reading glasses, the unlocked front door, the sound of Marcus's laugh. I spoke slowly, carefully, letting the truth settle into the air without forcing it. My throat tightened when I described hearing him say, "Can't wait to see Mom broke." But I kept going. I told them how I backed away quietly, how I drove without direction, how I turned my shock into strategy. I explained the trust, the early transfer of my assets, the quiet steps I took while pretending everything was ordinary. I saw a flicker of surprise ripple through the courtroom when I said the words. I moved everything before they did. When I finished, I let my gaze drift briefly toward Marcus. He finally lifted his eyes. They were red-rimmed, remorse etched into every line of his face. He looked like a man who had lost his way long before the transfers began. My heart clenched painfully. I looked away. Next came Serena's attorney. He tried to suggest confusion, miscommunication, even accidental overlap in accounts. But the evidence was too strong. The recovered digital logs, the cloud backups, the receipts, the recorded conversations. Every attempt to shift blame landed weakly. Then Marcus's attorney stood. "Your Honor," he said, "my client acknowledges his involvement. He is willing to enter a plea agreement and cooperate fully. He acted under pressure and emotional manipulation from his co-defendant." Marcus's voice cracked as he stood. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his words barely audible across the room. "I never meant to hurt you." The judge instructed him to remain quiet unless addressed, but the words had already landed inside me like a trembling echo. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not here. When both sides finished, the courtroom fell silent as the judge deliberated. Minutes felt like hours until he finally spoke. "Based on the evidence presented," he said, "the court finds sufficient grounds to convict Serena Vale of multiple counts of financial exploitation, fraud, and theft. Sentencing will follow the guidelines for repeated offenses and the severity of the financial harm." Serena stiffened, her eyes widening just slightly, a crack in the mask she had so carefully crafted. "As for Marcus Blake," the judge continued, "given his cooperation, admission of guilt, and evidence of coercion, the court will consider reduced sentencing with conditions, including restitution, financial counseling, community service, and mandatory rehabilitation." I felt my breath escape in a slow, shaky release. Justice, not vengeance, not destruction. Justice shaped like truth and consequence. When the gavel struck, I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was release. A door quietly closing behind us. A door quietly opening ahead. The morning after the verdict, the sky looked softer than it had in months, washed in a pale gold that felt almost like forgiveness. I woke slowly, not to fear or dread, but to a quiet emptiness I didn't quite recognize. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief either. It was something in between, like walking into a room after a long storm and realizing the walls are still standing. I sat up, reached for Henry's watch on the nightstand, and fastened it around my wrist. The leather felt warm, familiar, steady. It reminded me that endings aren't always loud. Sometimes they arrive like this, soft, patient, waiting for you to breathe again. I made breakfast the way I used to before everything happened. Scrambled eggs, toast, a small cup of berries. The simplicity of it felt like reclaiming a forgotten ritual. After eating, I walked through the house slowly, letting my fingers brush across the shelves and picture frames. This place had been my sanctuary, my battlefield, and my refuge all at once. But today, it felt like a place I could finally leave behind. I spent the morning packing a few boxes, not because I needed to, but because I was ready. I had decided weeks ago, quietly, that when this chapter ended, I would sell the house and start fresh somewhere smaller, calmer, closer to the ocean I'd always loved. Sarasota had been good to me, but there were too many shadows here now. Too many echoes. I folded clothes carefully, wrapped fragile keepsakes, and then paused when I reached the photo of Henry and me from our 25th anniversary. I held it to my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered, "We did right. We finished the story." Later that afternoon, Lionel and Gloria came by to help me sort through donations. The three of us worked in comfortable silence, broken only by small moments of conversation. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Gloria said softly as she wrapped a set of mugs. "When the big battle ends and life suddenly feels ordinary again. I smiled gently. Ordinary is what I prayed for, I said. I'll take every piece of it. Lionel placed a box near the door. I spoke with the community center, he said. They approved the support group. We can start meeting next month. I felt warmth bloom in my chest. Good, I said. People need a place to speak without fear. He nodded, just like we did. When they left, the house was quieter again, but not the kind of quiet that suffocates. It was a quiet that made space, a quiet that invited possibility. Around dusk, I sat at the dining table with a stack of letters I had been meaning to open. Bills, flyers, newsletters. Then, near the bottom of the pile, I found an envelope with handwriting I knew as well as my own heartbeat. Marcus. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper soft from how tightly he must have held it while writing. His words were careful, shaky, earnest. Mom, I know saying I'm sorry will never be enough. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. I just want you to know that everything I did came from fear. Not fear of losing you, but fear of not being enough. Serena made me feel like failure was the only thing I could offer. I let her guide me when I should have known better. I hurt you in the worst way a son can hurt his mother. I don't know if I can ever rebuild what I broke, but I want to try. I'm going to counseling. I'm doing everything they ask of me. Someday, if you can, I hope you'll let me sit with you again. Without shame, without lies, just as your son. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears sliding down my cheeks silently. Not because his words healed anything, but because they reached a part of me that had been waiting in the dark. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I felt the first step towards something new, something cautious, something possible. As evening settled in, I changed into a soft sweater and went to the small desk near the window where I kept my trust documents. I opened the folder and placed a new note inside. Funding allocation for a rehabilitation program. It wasn't large. It wasn't indulgent. It wasn't charity. It was structure, accountability, a path forward that didn't abandon responsibility, but didn't abandon him either. I whispered quietly into the still room. This is how healing starts. Later that night, I drove to the beach. The air was warm, the waves gentle, the sky blending into a soft indigo. I took off my shoes and walked along the sand, letting the water curl around my ankles. Each step felt like releasing something I'd been gripping too tightly. The ocean has a way of reminding you how small your wounds are compared to the vastness of what can still be healed. I sat on a smooth rock and watched the horizon. Families laughed in the distance. A couple walked hand in hand. The world had kept spinning through all of this, unchanged and unapologetic. It was comforting in a strange way. I whispered into the breeze. If you're listening, Henry, thank you for staying with me through all of this. As the waves rolled in and out, a sense of peace slowly settled over me. Not total peace, just enough to breathe, enough to begin again. When I finally stood to leave, I felt lighter than I had in months. My story wasn't defined by what Marcus did, or by what Serena tried to take. It was defined by what I reclaimed, my dignity, my future, my sense of self. And now, as I walked back to my car, I realized something else. I wasn't done building the rest of my life. Before driving home, I looked up at the sky and whispered the words that had lived inside me since the night everything started. He laughed when he thought he had taken everything. He didn't know I had already moved the ending. I was 3 steps ahead, and I'm not done.